the panel is called Diversity is Your Asset. We want everyone here to understand how you can really start bringing your diversity into the different spaces you are in. So either school, in careers, in jobs, in workplaces, but also elsewhere, right? So there are a lot of difficult conversations that don't necessarily happen sometimes in families or in social settings. And really being able to own your diversity and bring that diversity in all of those spaces. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we have, again, an incredible panel. I'm looking forward to getting started. So I'll start off with actually just introductory questions. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm not going to play teacher, I'm not going to call on you. Whoever wants to start, what's your experience, a little bit about you, but what's your experience with immigration specifically, and if you want to start including that into a larger picture of what's happening right now in the nation, and then go a little bit into the work that you do and how you bring diversity into your workplace.
Okay, teacher, I'll start. All right. Hi, thank you for having me. I want to start by saying thank you to Alpa, who invited me to this panel. I really appreciate it, and I hope to have something to contribute today. My name is Gunjali. I spent about 13 years of my life on Wall Street working for the New York Stock Exchange. And interesting story of how I got there. Short version is, I'm from India. I went to school in Delhi, which is the capital, so a city girl. And then my parents moved to the Philippines when I was about 12 years old. So right around the time when all the other stuff's hitting, I also kind of had a culture shock. That said, the school that I went to was very American. I went to an international school where a majority of the students did come here for their undergraduate education. But the culture shock was kind of both. So moving from India to the Philippines was a huge kind of cultural change. And even though I thought I was prepared for life in the US, coming to a small undergraduate institution in Virginia was another culture shock. Largely because America was not kind of the big thing that I pictured it, that it was going to be. And I see a lot of heads nodding, so I know. I spent about 13 years after that at the stock exchange, most recently as the director of their corporate social responsibility program. So a lot of the work that I did was centered around financial access and financial inclusion for women. Turns out there is a pretty solid problem in the US itself where lots of women don't have access to their bank accounts or don't have bank accounts and can't find $200 in an emergency, which is a pretty serious problem for such a wealthy nation. So I was working mostly to fix that. A lot of the issues that we're going to talk about today stem from my experience in that field, and yet like Edmund, I'm now an academic. So I am a full-time professor at Marymount Manhattan College. Academia comes with its own set of rules and its own set of challenges and its own set of diversity issues. So you'll hear a little bit about that as well.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to go next, or we can go down the line?
You can go left to right. Hello everyone, thanks for having me here, Stefan, Kloss. I grew up in Germany. I lived there a bit outside Munich, so my environment was essentially the Bavarian countryside. So if you see, you have pictures of the Alps and I have lots of green meadows. That's pretty much the nice environment in which I grew up. When I was 17, my dad took on a job in England, so we moved. So that was my first immigration experience. So we moved to England. At the time, I had I learned a bit of high school English, but definitely wasn't as fluent and used to it. It's still Central Europe in a way, but it wasn't my first exposure to a different culture. Where I grew up, we didn't really have many foreigners. It was a relatively monotonous kind of culture, group of people. Also for me, that was a good experience. Experience that shaped me a lot. I think if I would not have had this experience moving to England, I definitely wouldn't be here now. So I spent my last high school years there, also my undergrad time. After that, I was here in Japan, which was an even bigger culture shock. So I felt that I was fine adapting to English culture, but if you go to Japan, things are completely different again, very different. Then in 2003, I started working at my current employer, CS Associates. We are a global management consulting firm. Right now, I'm heading up the office in New York, in the Empire State Building, 51st floor. And I've been in the US now for the last 10 years. this Monday I handed in my naturalization papers. So administration really I will cross over to becoming American.
I just want to say thank you for having me here today. For me, I'm what's called a satellite baby. So if a lot of people aren't familiar with that, I actually was born in Queens, New York, but I was raised on the island of Trinidad and Tobago. My mom is from Trinidad and Tobago, but at 6 months, because of like lots of immigrant families, they can't afford to raise their children here. She was a nanny her whole entire life. So statistics say that a nanny, a single mom nanny, should have had an attorney daughter. So that's kind of the journey of my life. My mom's highest degree of education was high school. So navigating going to the University of Connecticut at undergrad was something difficult, and she was determined to figure out. Then after undergrad, I went straight to law school. And being the first in my family of being an attorney, that was also something different to figure out. And how a little child from Trinidad and Tobago can be an attorney in a society like today. Right after law school, I actually went into private practice where I practiced criminal law and employment discrimination. I loved criminal law, but graduating from law school, I was 25, and all my clients were my age. And so it was very difficult. They were my age and my race, and to convey to them that your life don't have to be a statistic, and that the criminal justice system isn't against you, that you can make it out. They didn't want to hear that from me, right? Even though I lived it. After that, I actually applied to a job to work for the Transport Workers Union. Statistics also says a young attorney shouldn't be in-house counsel advising in a large union like the Transport Workers Union. For those who aren't familiar, those are the unions that represent train operators, bus operators, anyone you see in the NTA system. I'm in-house counsel there, where I represent them in bargaining against MTA in major contracts and helping employees in arbitration. So I use my culture to my advantage because, as you know, lots of West Indians work in the transportation system, and they love me because they can be their true selves when they come into my office.
Okay, and my turn, I guess. This is a difficult panel to be on because I can't really match any of these guys. But so I'm currently working at Barclays. I'm the director of strategic initiatives there, which means that I'm responsible for any major transformation project that the bank has undertaken. So it's an interesting role. How I got there is a really long story, so I'm going to try to do the short version. I grew up in India, in Bombay. I was there through high school and then moved here for my undergrad. And I still don't understand how my parents, who wouldn't send me for an overnight to my neighbor's house, decided to put me on a plane and just say good luck. But something in their heads told them that that was a good idea, and so here I am. I did my undergrad at Stony Brook University. Got hired at Citi through their campus recruiting program, and so essentially, wasn't something that I was looking for. I wasn't looking to be in financial services. I just ended up there, which I think was a good thing. I took a little career detour when I went into consulting, mainly around the crisis, when we had the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. The banking industry wasn't doing so well, so I moved into consulting. And when I had my little daughter 5 years ago, I decided that consulting wasn't the right career for me at the point, with some travel involved. And so I decided to come back into the industry and work at Barclays. I also sit on the board for Speak and can speak to the work we do, which is really amazing. And I'm hoping that we can grow as a nonprofit.
So who's as excited as I am to have this discussion? Yes, you can definitely clap your hands for that. Again, an incredible panel with incredible experiences. If you do have questions, we are going to take questions at the end. So please do think of those questions and then hold them, because we'll have those. But we have questions right now that we'll get started with. As I mentioned, some students have also asked questions. So to start, I will actually have Crystal start the first question. Go ahead.
This is a question for everyone. What is an obstacle that had the most impact on your growth or professional journey?
So I can repeat that. An obstacle that had the most impact on your journey.
I'm happy to start with mine. So when we just moved to England, I needed to get into high school. And German culture is very direct. It's also not using a lot of praise for people. So you're just expected to do your work, and if something is not going well, they tell you, and if it's going well, then you don't really need to make a mention of that. So I needed a letter of recommendation from English high school, and I had to ask my English teacher in Germany, a German person, to write a letter of recommendation for my English school so that they would accept me to that school. Well, the letter came back from the school's principal, and it came to my parents, and we had just moved to England, and we were still in a hotel room, all of us, because we hadn't yet found a house. And my dad opened up the letter, and he looked at me with disappointment, and the letter read along these lines: well, dear Mr. Kloss, my dad, I regret to inform you, but your two sons, Stefan, me, and Thomas, my brother, are not fit, or their current career track record doesn't suggest that work school is the best next step in their career. You're welcome to come in for an interview, but at this point in time, we would actually encourage you to seek other options. That letter I still have in my binder. It's probably more valuable than any of my school report cards, and the disappointment that my dad had, and that really spurred me on as motivation throughout. That same principle when in England, if you make it into Cambridge or Oxford, it's a big deal. I had to work so hard for 2 years to make that, because when I started at the bottom of my class. They handed out every term report cards, and they ranked students even. So I was 15 out of 15, and I got a D. And every term that improved a little bit, and in the end I was at top of my class. And that same principal then wrote a letter and said, hey, congratulations for making it into Oxbridge, and it's an honor for the school as well to have that contingent. So to me, that was probably the toughest lesson, and it changed my attitude a lot too, because when I was 16, 17, I was a bit aggressive, I loved resentment, I wasn't so professional, I didn't study so much, so it was a real attitude changer for me. And that work ethic that still serves me today is because I picked up because of that letter. So that's my business.
So you can learn from your failures.
My failures, but also in a way it was that teacher, the German teacher that had a different understanding. Being an English teacher, she should have known better. But that didn't help me then and there, so I had to really dig myself out of that hole, and that's what I did. So one of the advice I can give you, that happens, it's disappointing, but control what you can do, and move on from there.
Yeah, keep moving forward. The marathon continues. Jade wanted to.
Yeah, I can go next. One of my biggest obstacles is the culture or background being clashed with how American society operates. So in the Trinidad and Tobago culture, little girls are seen and not heard. You're expected to be quiet and focused and things of that nature. And in American society, you have to be assertive on what you want in life, right? So placing who I was raised to be, right, and having that education abilities to be an attorney, and grabbing those opportunities, taking the risk, and finding out how those two can work together to get where I am, right? So I always felt that I'm smart enough to be an attorney. I can get this dream job, but I had to get to a place in my life where I wasn't telling myself, that no, I wasn't good enough for that position. Maybe no, I shouldn't be in that school. And when I realized that, I'm sitting in the same class as my counterpart. I can read the same textbooks and do the same research, is when I realize that I'm going to progress in my professional career. So just dealing with the cultural identity versus what my dreams and my goals are, and how to place that together.
Yeah, each one of us is bicultural up here, so that experience alone is defining. Gunjali,
Sure. All right, so I will tell you about the one obstacle that pretty much shaped my career. I was in my undergraduate institution. It's Hetal University, tiny 800 girls on a hilltop, mostly white. I think I was the first Indian girl to attend, and you know, the first couple of questions were, wow, your English is great. The usual, right? That college had one intern that they sponsored every year who would intern at the New York Stock Exchange. And the reason they do that is because the wife of the then president of the stock exchange had gone to my college. So every year, one intern would go up in the summer and intern over there. So 800 girls in the college, 800 applied, right? Because why wouldn't you? So I also applied very optimistically. It was a 6-round process to get to the final of that interview. You had to be junior, you had to have a certain GPA, the usual, right? So I make it to round number 5, all right? Round number 5 is a written round, right? So we have to write answers in a timed environment. At that round, I found out that 2 of my roommates, there were 4 of us in a room, right? 2 of my other roommates had also applied to the internship, and none of us ever told each other. That was the last conversation we had. So I made it past that 5th round, right? One of the other ones didn't. At the final round, right? I did everything I could. I studied. I, had the mission statement of the company memorized. I mean, I'm on this thing, right? I didn't make it finally at the end. Okay, I don't make. I didn't get the spot. I was a very close number 2. That's what I was told. So this was completely unacceptable in my head. All right. So when I found out I didn't make it, I walked back to career services, and Tina was kind of the head of career services at the time. I said, Tina, this is not okay. Like, this is my shot. Give it to me. And she goes, we did everything we could. You did a great interview. It was, congratulations. You should feel really good about yourself. Thanks. I said, no, Tina, there must be something we can do here. And I sat there for a minute, and I think just to get me out of that chair, she said, you know what? Here's the email of the president of the New York Stock Exchange. Send him an email. See what happens. And I did. And he wrote back in 20 minutes. He said, if you're this eager, just come. We'll make it work. Right? And I went, and I made it work, right? And at the end of the day, I'm the one that ended up with a job offer just because of the way things worked out. I got put in the right department. But the point is, like, no is not really no. Okay? It's okay, right? But in a career context.
You just said this.
Yes, I just thought that. No is not no in a career context. Or at least ask for kind of the right thing, right? Ask for the next thing. Be sure to ask. It's worth asking.
I can't stress that enough for the young people here. There are going to be rejections in your future as you apply for college, and just remember that doesn't have anything to do with your particular value. It just means that it wasn't the right step and something else is along the way, or you have an opportunity that's just waiting for you and you need to knock on that door. Incredible. And yes, speaking as a parent, no, the context can be no. So Alpa, your daughter is listening. What would you say to your daughter?
Oh, wait, I'm not answering the obstacle question. Okay, so in terms of obstacles, so I mentioned I started my career at Citi, and during the crisis, I was actually let go. So it wasn't a choice that I quit Citi and went into consulting. So that, to me, I think I was 5 years into my career, not even. So, and I still thought of myself as a kid at that point, and so I was like, I have no idea what I should do now, because I don't know what it means to be laid off. I'm here on an H-1 visa. If you don't have a job, your visa is out of status. What do you do now? I had my boyfriend and my husband now, and the amazing network of friends that were able to actually help me get another job. So that's why I actually really think what Speed does, again, I'm not trying to do a plug here, but the network that you get by being a Speed student, I wouldn't have had that network had it not been for my husband. he's a good networker, he keeps in touch with people and he does things like that. Me on the other hand, being shy, timid, whatever else I was back then, I barely get in touch with people, I barely talk to people even now. That's just the personality type, I'm an introvert. So for an introvert being in that situation, it was an obstacle, it was a huge challenge, I didn't know what to do next. And but it worked out in some ways. I can't say that I did anything, spectacularly incredible like hounding Tina or anything like that, or working very hard. In some sense, I got lucky. But yeah, I guess when you have things come up, one thing I feel people are either proud or afraid to ask for help. And maybe that's like, I didn't hesitate. It was on my Facebook, it was on my LinkedIn that I don't have a job, I need a job, someone help me. And that's kind of how, apart from your own immediate network, getting that second and third network to help you is something, again, not natural to me, but that helps.
And I would assume that that has something to do with your cultural upbringing as well, and that's going to segue into our next question. So I'm going to pass the mic to Lilia.
Alpa, how did you handle coming to the US for college, and did you face any discrimination? And also, how do you deal with implicit bias?
I think that's a good question. How did I deal with coming to college? It was difficult because when I landed here, I didn't know anybody. I had a random family picking me up from the airport. I had never met them before. But and that's why like the whole host family, like I wish one day hopefully we'll be able to do that. If you can become a host family for an immigrant student landing into the country, and the host family and the college I was in, I went to hostel for a year, and being a private school, they actually had a really good international program where they actually took us to Target and to Walmart. Like, I didn't know what Target is. I did not know what Walmart is. When I first walked into Target, I was just like, what is this thing? I had never seen a shop this big in my life. So it was difficult. The culture shock that everybody mentioned. And again, having the personality type of not being very social, was a challenge. I didn't make any friends in the first couple of years of university. And I transferred to Stony Brook because after I realized, when I went to hostel for the first semester, I realized that wasn't the school for me. I was doing computer science and they are more of a law school. So then I transferred, and plus they were like 3 times more expensive than Stony Brook, so I stayed at Stony Brook. Implicit bias, I think that's still there today. I feel it even now. So I definitely,
Actually, for everybody, if you can define implicit bias first, and then.
So, implicit bias, the way I understand it, and Hetal can correct me here, or anyone else, is I see it as a subconscious bias, right? Or so you don't realize that you're actually discriminating or treating a person differently, but you're doing it. So it's kind of, it's happening sort of naturally, almost second nature. So you're not like going out of your way to be discriminatory.
I can actually, if with bringing back what Edmund was saying about the image of Nipsey, and what you might see is implicit bias, but then really going past the bias that you have and getting to know somebody. So
yeah. So it happened a lot. Like Nisha was talking about, you have white neighborhoods and non-white neighborhoods. When you go to school here, or at least my experience in my university, you have a white table and a brown table and a black table. The kids don't talk to each other. They're like, my entire network at school was other AC people, like brown people. I don't know why that was, and that's still, I'm at work, it doesn't happen anymore. I think our workplaces have improved a lot that they don't allow it. But in schools, at least when I went to school, it seems to still happen. And it still happens in social settings sometimes. How do you get around it? That's a really good question. I don't know.
and I actually think it'd be interesting to get, and I want to say your name properly, Stefan, but it's Stefan. Okay. Given that you are a white male and there is implicit bias, implicit bias maybe in your favor, or I want to know how you see it. Given outwardly, you might be able to sit at the white table, but you are also an immigrant. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good topic. So in a lot of ways, I was privileged to some extent. My race, yeah, it's given to you, right? It's a lottery. What can you do about it? So talking like I started with unconscious bias. So essentially all it is, it's just a blind spot, right? So you make experiences all your life, and then because you don't use your brain power to dissect every single decision, because that would just take up too much time and energy, you just start building habits, and those habits over time can become a blind spot. So if I just make assumptions, right, because this is a lot of what I've seen, and then apply that to other people, then it becomes a blind spot. So we all do it, I do it too. You may do it, maybe when I walked up, you had a certain impression of me, which is fine, it's natural, it's actually healthy to have a little bit of that, just to keep an open mind. So where I'm going with this is at SES, for example, we have an unconscious bias training for our workforce. We just wrapped that up. We had also a meeting on Friday about this. So what I took away from this is that we all have our biases, some are good, some are negative. If you can't really change others, at least you can't change them quickly. And when it happens to you personally, it can hurt, but the first thing you should do is probably don't assume intent, because it's just someone's history and the way they were brought up. So give them the benefit of the doubt, but also help communicate or prove them wrong if they have a certain point of view. So for me, in some ways, maybe being on the unfortunate side, I play to the strengths as well. I do a lot about, like for mediating. So you mentioned an example of white table, brown table. I somehow always have friends from different circles. So my wife is Indian. I mix a lot because now also because I'm in a position where I need an office. It's become my job to help everyone integrate. So those are some of the things in which I deal with it. But think of biases, there are the good ones, or the bad ones, and also the good ones. So being German helps me a lot building an image with my clients. Yes, I'm a little bit stiff. I wouldn't be the first person that you give a hug. That's okay. But I can also say, hey, I'm very reliable. I'm thoughtful. So you play a little bit to that. So build a character around this, and as people get to know you better, you can help them change their perceptions, because then they say, hey, this is a German person, but he is, I don't know, has certain character traits and so forth that I wouldn't have expected in that person. So it can hurt, but focus more on yourself and build the relationship and speak up also when it happens.
Yeah, I know you want to jump in, and I'm going to actually ask the question. You can both answer that as well. Being of a double minority, so as a woman as well, how would that, or woman, but also you mentioned when you were 25, your clients were 25 as well. So age is another one. How does that all affect the ability to do work successfully or in the way that you want to do it?
For me, it was a progression. So when I was younger, at 25, going into a criminal courtroom, I always got it. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with criminal courtrooms. All the attorneys are allowed to sit on the front benches, and everyone has to sit behind them. So as an attorney, fully suited with my briefcase, I go to the front bench, and I always get it. The court officer always approaches me, saying, "Ma'am, you don't belong here. This is for the attorneys." And I always look at him and say, clearly I'm the attorney here. Everyone always assumed that I wasn't. And at first I used to be outraged. I used to go back to my office or come home and say, why can't they see that I'm the attorney? I don't just wear a suit to court because I want to look pretty. I don't want to be here. So it was outrageous first. I now practice employment discrimination. So now I see it all the time. So I'm involved in all of it. Right, I'm privileged enough to work in a union setting where it's very diverse, but sometimes I still see it, right? My director will send me into a big bargaining meeting, and she always says, well, she's a white female, she always says, if you feel uncomfortable, you can come to me and talk. And I always say, you don't say that to my male colleagues. You don't have to worry about me feeling uncomfortable. right? I can stand on my own 2 feet just as they can. And if they ever feel uncomfortable, I'm sure they'll come to you. And if I ever feel uncomfortable, I'm going to come to you the same way. So I've evolved in that I now call people on it. And so they could understand that you're imposing your biases without even realizing it. And sometimes it's a teachable moment, so they could understand that I'm not being sensitive, but you're treating me differently than my peers. So it's an evolving process from anger to let me turn this into a teachable moment.
In your example, that was happening with good intent, right?
Yes.
You want to be helpful, but you're not really helping.
Correct.
And I know you have a number of experiences, Gunjali, for business, the business world, and a woman of color, especially at NYSE.
Yeah, a little bit. One of the things that I experienced when I first started, and I started as a 21-year-old on the stock exchange trading floor, I wasn't allowed to wear pants on the trading floor. I had to be, there was a rule. And right up until 2001, right up until 2010 actually, that rule didn't get amended. There's also a silly rule about pantyhose in women. Can you believe this stuff? Like this was in a manual, like this was actually written down in a manual, right? And this is, I understand this is a 300-year-old institution, but they had this much time. Okay, so that was an issue. What else were you doing? Anyway, when I started at the exchange, there was a lot of, they had just opened an international office. So they just opened an office to help international listings sort of come and list. So Sony and sort of the big sort of German companies were there. Lots of, about 500 international companies over the course of that. Of course, I got put into the international department. Nobody asked me what I wanted to do, or that was assumed that that's where I fit in, right? Because I looked different. We used to also call it the United Colors of Benetton office, because we all looked like different, right? So one of the things that's worth understanding is that there's 2 types of diversity, right? There's surface level diversity. Surface level diversity is what you and I can see. We look different, right? It's the color of our skin, it's what our hair looks like, it's the way that we dress, right? But there is something called deep level diversity. And deep level diversity is sometimes harder to identify. It's a diversity of thought, right? It's how your experiences have shaped you and how that makes you, or the value that you bring to a table with a different way that you think, right? And I'd argue that in the US today, we see a lot of surface level diversity, but I want to know how many of us are actually progressing towards diversity of thought, right? Because it's way more important for you to have 4 people around the table. Maybe, it shouldn't matter what they look like, but the fact that they think differently should be the asset that they're bringing to the table, right? So that's kind of, I think, where we want to progress to.
You jumped an entire section into advice, but we'll take it. Was there any more? I think you want to say something, Stefan? You're okay. Okay, so going into the workplace, we've already talked a little bit about that, but Jade, is for you specifically, what does diversity look like in the criminal justice system?
Unfortunately, that's sad. When you go into the criminal court, you do see that a majority of the defendants are unfortunately African American and African American males. You'll see a little more diversity in the petty crime section, but when we're talking about drug offenses or physical assaults and things like that, you do see disproportionately African American males. There's also issues in who the attorneys are. When I was in private practice, I practiced in Long Island. I think there were about 3 African American female attorneys in Long Island, and we all knew each other because we saw each other all the time. There were probably a handful of African American male attorneys in Long Island, and we all knew each other because we saw each other in and out the court all the time. And the issue is that if we disproportionately have a lot of African American male defendants and not enough attorneys that look like them, the distrust for the criminal justice system will never stop, right? So sometimes they needed to see the African American attorney, defense attorney saying, hey, stop, wait a minute, or speaking to the parents to say what's actually going on. I understand that generally we think the system is against us, but let's take a step back and see what's really happening here. And that sometimes just seeing an African American attorney could change your perspective on things and be a wake-up call. So criminal justice system has a lot of fixing to do, and diversity is an issue.
So a lesson that we could take away from here is that more of these young people need to be in those spaces and represent what this room looks like in these careers so that you're not pegged as international, so that you don't have the criminal justice system continue in this cycle as it is. And it's important to keep that in mind. I want to jump to the next question, piggybacking off of that question, Crystal.
When handling claims of race, gender, disability, and religious discrimination, did you learn or realize anything of importance, a commonality between cases in regards to why it happened, or what we can do to avoid such discrimination from happening again?
Well, I'll take a step back. I initially wanted to be an attorney probably my whole entire life because I wanted to be a voice. The reason why I picked the particular types of law that I would pick is because
I'm not the type of attorney that I'm in here for the money. I'm the type of attorney that I want to have some social connection.
like I need to have purpose in what I do when I go to work. I need a sense of fulfillment when I leave the office. So that's why I focus on criminal law, because that's the people, I have people contact. I also did a little family law, because that's also people contact. And employment discrimination doesn't seem like people contact, but it is, because I work with people who are being discriminated on the workplace. People who aren't getting jobs because of their race or religion or excluded because of those purposes. So that's the people contact. What I've seen across the board is that people without a voice are the people who are getting targeted, right? So in the areas of discrimination for religion and race and sex discrimination, I always see that as majority minorities. And why? Because they come to this country and they say, I want to make a better life for myself. I have an opportunity. I have this job, and yes, my boss is horrible, but I need this job to help my family. And I always have to tell my clients, yes, it's a job, but you're human, and you deserve respect. And I don't care who he is or she is, if the job, there's always gonna be a job. And if you stand up and speak out, then he'll stop doing it, or she'll stop doing it to someone else. So you have to be brave. So when I look at race discrimination, gender discrimination, and religious discrimination, it's normally a marginalized group of people who normally don't want to stand up and say this is wrong. And it's not until it's bad, where they're terminated or something like that, where they're now for the first time speaking up for themselves.
Speaking up for yourself, I think it's important to also realize that what we try to do at Speak is help young people, and also a lot of the mentors that we have as well, kind of understand their cross-cultural experiences and integrating those cross-cultural experiences. Because at the end of the day, you have to live and work here in America. And even if you go home and you're Indian or you're German or you're Trinidad from Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know, what do you say?
Tobago.
If you're Tobago, but is it Trinidadian or okay, if you're Trinidadian, you know, whatever you are when you go home, outside you have to assume a certain social character. And so our mentors as well who come to us say that they do mentor because they need to know that there are other young women going through this, and it helps them see that reflection of, through those girls, see that reflection of, okay, it's okay for me to be from Ukraine, it's okay for me to be from another country, but you know, at the same time in my workplace, it reminds them I do have to assume this, this particular persona. So to ask the next question on top of that, it actually comes from Monique, who is the lovely young woman taking the video for us. So Lilia is going to ask Monique's question for us.
What are some organizational behaviors businessmen and women should have? Do you notice any big differences in how women and men approach business? And this question is for Gunjali.
Two things, right, to dissect in that question. One is, what are some organizational behaviors that should be undertaken, right, from a corporate standpoint? And the second part is, what are the differences between how men and women approach business? Is that kind of right? There's a whole sort of set of studies which will suggest the things that you were talking about earlier, which is that, you know, women often don't raise their hands up and speak first, right? They want to allow There's also an entire set of studies that say women very sincerely believe that if they just do the work, they will get promoted, right? So that there is an inherent fairness in the system that will reward them for doing the work, right? That's not necessarily the case. And a lot of times, just doing the work just gets you a seat at the table, right? It doesn't actually move you forward, kind of where you need to be. And so advocating for yourself is important. The last question was talking about what are we doing, or what, if you're from a different culture and your culture is not very, or in our culture, for example, we don't, like the German culture actually, we're not very superlative, like we don't really, we're not overly like, we're great all the time. It's very subtle, right? And it's kind of almost not mentioned, like you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing. But here, that's not the case, right? When you do a good project or you do a decent project, you need to be able to stand up and say, hey, I just grew this thing by 59%, where's my raise, right? And it's okay to say that. And being able to do that code switch, right? Being able to go from, yes, I'm this person, but in the workplace, I'm also this person, right? And it's okay for you to be able to go back and forth is an important organizational behavior, and it's a learned skill, right? You gotta kind of practice it a couple of times. So it may be that before you go in and ask for the raise, perhaps you need to have the conversation with a friend and kind of try it out a little bit, see how it works, right? And then you go on and do it. But it's doable and it should be done. And I think more, in particular young people, it's okay for you to state your expectations of the job, okay? Your boss can't read your mind, your manager doesn't know, right, that leaving at 5:30 p.m. is really important because there's a volunteer event that you do. She doesn't know that until you tell her that, right? This stuff is important. Be sure to speak up.
And Ms. Trikha was so excited about this event that she actually almost came here yesterday.
I did come here yesterday. I did.
And that's how much she wanted to speak to you all, so remember that, right? There are people like her who are making the trip on 2 days, and it's very important to acknowledge that. Thank you for doing that. Sorry that you know that. I'd actually, since you've been in a number of international contexts, that question also applies, how do those behaviors vary in different international contexts? So England versus America versus Germany versus Japan. And noticing the men versus women behaviors in those respective countries. So did you notice commonalities, perhaps between UK and Germany or UK and America?
Yeah. What my time abroad taught me is that things often, especially in Japan, they may look similar on the surface, but underneath it's completely different. And I also would like to prefix that question that you asked, because it's also about making general assumptions, right? Like if you talk about how women behave, how men behave, how different people of different nations behave, then I'm also talking about maybe my biases or my blind spots. So I want to be a little careful about these generalizations that I'm making too, because I don't want to make too many, right, and perpetuate them. So to me, the observation is that you don't, when you come into a new environment and you get to know new people, you need to have an extremely open mind to understand, and that mind needs to stay open. And I have a feeling a lot of the issues we've been talking about, and also in the way in which the US, I feel, is going, is that we all have an opinion, we all need certain things, and that's okay, but we spend so little time paying attention to others and understanding them and seeing what's going on. And in England was less of a problem, but in Japan, for example, I had a hard time connecting because I was so centered about, at the time I was 22, I was very centered about myself and what I needed and what I wanted. And listening to others and understanding them and developing them, and also like suspending your own agendas, to me that's the most important thing. So you will see that in Japan, for example, a lot of women, especially in the workforce, is probably one of the, if you take the general indexes of what kind of tasks women are given. They may graduate from the top universities, but they're supposed to make coffee, take notes, not speak up very much. And like Japan is one of those countries. But at the same time, instead of just saying, oh, that is wrong, because that may be wrong by my standards, it's probably also helpful to understand it and see how the women feel about it and why is that so, why are they not speaking up, and be helpful if you can, but don't assume that you know a better way of doing things. It always starts with being very introspective, managing yourself, and also understanding others at first. And if you do that, you'll learn a lot about it and gain a lot of appreciation for things. And if something is not in line with your beliefs, then be brave, speak up, and try to help it. But you will help people a lot more by being understanding and being supportive rather than raising the finger and saying, oh, this is not how things are supposed to work.
Yeah, and actually I give talks on the immigrant student experience, and we have a lot of teachers usually in the audience, and it's kind of a reverse learning, because in America it's about the immigrant student, especially in New York City, and really trying to get the immigrant student to feel comfortable in the classroom. So they find it interesting when I tell them, you know, sometimes just the first thing you can do is understand the individual culture of your student, and then assume whether participation or certain activities are appropriate or okay, or make them feel comfortable. And when I was younger, it was, again, hard for me. This action never happened. My teachers always had to call on me. They knew that I knew the answer. I was mouthing the answer, but I never had this action in my repertoire. And so learning the culture of your students in a city like New York City or Philadelphia or Newark, New Jersey, and as teachers, as educators, as parents, as people who are working with young people, I think it's important to remember that as well. And I hope each one of you goes and travels one day, either back to home countries or countries of affiliation, but also elsewhere. It's so important to live elsewhere and also try to integrate in that setting. I lived in China for 2 years, and I can't tell you how much of a growth experience that is to really try to understand that culture itself, and get out of the American mindset, which is limiting sometimes. Do you want to jump in on that, or I can actually ask another question? Good? Okay, so I like this one. It's two. I think you're going to answer this one later, Gunjali. So Monique's second question, Lilia, if you will.
Alpa, why do you call your family feminist but in denial? And how did being raised in this environment have an impact on you growing up and wanting to fight for gender equality?
Okay, so just to set the context there, I think on my profile everywhere, it basically says that I was raised by a family that is feminist but in denial. So that's a really good question. And why are they feminist? I think they are feminist because I don't see a non-feminist family sending their daughter away at the age of 18 to go study. They knew I was a smart student and they wanted to invest in my future, and maybe by extension their own future, by then sending me away to study, and they knew that I could make something out of my life. My sister was divorced like 2 years into her wedding. That's not common in India at all. Right? Even now, like that's a big taboo. The fact that they were able to sort of stand behind her and tell her, you know what, if you don't like this marriage, you have a home, come back. Most other families, like if you get divorced, you're on your own. Like your family's not taking you back. You know, they gave you away in marriage and then that's what they're done. So to me, like that is what makes them feminist. Why I think they're in denial, if you ask them, do you think you're a feminist? Their answer is going to be no. And I think there's lots of reasons why. I think the first in my mind is there's a very negative connotation associated with the word, which I don't get. Like, I don't know why being a feminist is considered a bad thing, or people refrain from calling themselves that. I see that's changing, but it hasn't changed completely. So I think it's one is that there is a negative connotation to the word.
I'm a feminist. It just means you're supportive of women. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's probably why I would call them denial. Like they do feminist things, but they don't like buy into the feminist theory of the agenda. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that also has to do with daughters who learn to speak up for themselves, or have the platform to do so. I have my parents here who are hiding cleverly behind over there. I'd actually like to welcome them up, so if you will, both of my parents, the programs that you see. You're not going to sit up front. And this is a cultural thing, right? So they're gonna out of the way, out of the limelight. But yeah, so they've given me room, or I had to fight for it. But it is daughters who can then make that space for then families to change the perception of what being a feminist is all about. It just means treating girls and boys equally is all it really means, is all it means.
Sorry, Hetal, just to the second part of that question, just a quick thing, like how did growing up in that environment help me? I think I'm doing everything I'm doing because of how my upbringing was, and when I left home and I saw that that wasn't normal, that other people didn't have, you know, that same opportunity, when I heard stories about like bad marriages where people not leaving, or kids, I know in my own family there are girls who are not allowed to, you know, go away because why would you go away to study, right? Like that was just not okay. So I think that then drove everything that I do now, and you know, outside of work.
You're raising a daughter.
Hopefully a feminist daughter. Yeah, I'm
Just
also-
means equal rights, equal
I'm
everything.
afraid that she's gonna be the rebel against me.
One step forward, right? So we're going to move on to, in speaking of growth and what you can do in the workspace, but also wherever you are. I'd like to ask each of you, what as individuals in power, what steps do you take currently to ensure that you as a person who is diverse, or that in general diversity is brought to the forefront?
I can start with that. So, as I said before, I think organizations in general are doing a much better job about being aware of, you know, are they hiring diverse? Are they promoting diverse? So it's happening organically within organizations. It's happening all, like, people are pushing for it, and I also think it's happening organically because we are seeing more, you know, more graduating class being diverse versus, you know, people have better access maybe to education, or there's more of a push for, there's more parents that are pushing their kids to do things that they're interested in and to pursue their passions. So it's happening organically through that social setting, and organizations in general. Like I can speak for Barclays. I know ZS does this like whole unbiased, conscious or subconscious, unconscious bias training in schools everywhere. Deloitte has changed their fraternity. You know, they give 4 or 5 weeks now to that. That wasn't done before. So I feel like it's happening everywhere. That's a trend. I think we have the millennials to thank for it, because they won't come work for an organization unless the organization has a good corporate social responsibility sort of arm. And so it's not because, so it's kind of happening both ways. There's the incoming generation pushing for it, and then the older people are kind of like, okay, we don't really have a choice because we need to hire these people, so we'll do the right thing for the wrong reasons.
Whatever reasons, just keep knocking on those doors or sending those emails. Anybody else?
For me, it's always being conscious that complexly diverse, right? So now I'm in an environment where people identify with me culturally, but now I have to understand that how does gender play? And I'm the only female staff attorney in the union, so who's gonna take the mantle to talk to women in the transit authority, which is traditionally not a female dominated workforce, right? We don't really think about it, but there are female track workers, and simple things as restrooms and maternity leave and reasonable accommodations are things that they face every day. Or female bus operators. We don't think about pregnant bus operators, so we don't see it, but it happens. Or female train operators, we don't see it often, but it happens. And in a big organization, in a big union, sometimes no one really wants to take up that mantle until the one person complains, and we fix the problem for that one person. So for me, it's saying, how do we change the policy? How do we always address this issue so we're ahead of it and not waiting to solve the problem when it comes? So for me, it's just being that voice for the gender and the immigrant community and the African American culture, and always identifying when that voice needs to be spoken up for.
So I switched, right? So I switched from a white-collar job at the stock exchange where it was mostly men, to the extent where once after a meeting, they turned the TV on, right? And it was all of us, the management team was sitting there, and I was the only woman. They actually put it on like the porn channel. They were gonna watch that. And I literally said, are you kidding me? Like for a second, and they all kind of turned around, they're like, oh, you're here. Like it was almost like we didn't notice you, right? What is that? So one, speak up, okay? It's okay for you to say, this is not okay. Like, can you just fix it, right? And then somebody apologized to me later. One of them then sort of, kind of a week or so later sort of saw me and said, I'm so sorry about that. I'm so embarrassed that happened. So they didn't realize, right, that that's what was happening. So it's okay, one, to speak up. Two, when you are in a position of power, I think it is important for you to be the voice, right? So now I work in education, I'm a professor, and education is typically what is known as a pink-collar job, right? Where it's mostly women, or it's majority women, and yet the people in power are very often men. One of the things that happens, we all know what a glass ceiling is, right? A glass ceiling is when, after a certain level, women don't move ahead. There's something called a glass escalator. A glass escalator is when a man starts in a position that's kind of typically female-based, so like a nurse job or teaching, right? And gets promoted at 3 times the pace because he's expected to be in charge because of his gender. And this is implicit unconscious bias, and yet it happens. Right? When you see these things, it's important to educate everybody around you that this is what is happening, right? But if you are in a position of power where I'm teaching a class of 30, right? Call on the woman first, right? Even if she's not raising her hand, call on, the first 3 women I call, the first 3 people I call on in class to answer the question, make sure they're women. Just level it a little bit, right? And then it kind of brings everybody else back around to the table to make it worthwhile. So.
And you've already answered the second question, but I'll ask it for everybody. As an immigrant woman now, what advice would you give to a young immigrant girl? Oh, sorry, Crystal. I'm asking Crystal's question. What advice would you give to an immigrant girl who has big goals and is trying to succeed in this country, from Crystal? And then to add on to that, any suggestions for how to do this gracefully or even angrily to make sure that you're challenging any perceptions of racism or sexism? Anybody?
I can start with that one. So I think consistently what we've heard, the message that I've heard even listening to this panel and the speakers before us is to speak up, right? So to be able to do that. And I know that's not easy, like trust me, it's very hard. The fact that I'm sitting up here at almost 40 years old, I'm still panicking inside. So it's very natural. I know Crystal I completely feel you. So it's normal to not be comfortable. It's normal to not feel the ability to raise your hand or to say something. And as much as you might not get lucky to have a professor like Gunjali who's going to pick on you. So you just have to work on that and build yourself internally so that you feel like you can raise your hand and say what you need to say. And I do think that is the best advice, is just be able to raise your hand, say what you're thinking, talk to your professors about where you want to go to school, talk to your managers about what you want to do next in your career. Those conversations have been the most awkward for me, but I always have them. I need to make this title by this year. What is my career plan? After every promotion, how do I get from here to the next one? Very uncomfortable conversations for me, but very crucial, and you need to have them.
I would say for me is to use your culture to your advantage. Throughout my whole entire life, I felt like I was hiding from my accent, trying to fit in, trying to be American. And when I thought I had it all together, interesting story, I was actually in my last year of law school in an advocacy class. And I got up and I was doing my mock trial. And a white male professor stopped me. And what he said was, "You're not from this country, right?" And at first I was like, yes, I'm American. I was born here, right? Because at that point in my life, I thought I got rid of the accent that I was hiding the whole time. But the thing that I was running from my entire life is actually the thing that got me probably my position. Because what was missing in the union was a West Indian American attorney that identified with 90% of the workforce. What was missing was the disconnect with how do we connect with our membership. And when here this African American West Indian attorney walks into the office with all the other qualifications as all other attorneys, the question is, do we have this attorney that identify, that can connect, or another attorney that looks like the rest of the staff attorneys here? So don't be afraid of your culture. It's okay to be weird. It's okay to have an accent, because there might be someone out there that you can reach out to because that's what they're running from, and that's what they need to feel comfortable in themselves.
We have lots of people who try to make workplace more inclusive and make everyone feel comfortable. So trust them to do their job. I promise I will do that job within my sphere of control. Then the next question is you. What are you going to do? And maybe the only thing that makes you different is, once people look beyond your optics, is that, like, what sets apart this, let's say, white prep school boy, rich family, making a career in you? Oftentimes, like, once you look beyond the surface, it's just that they have better connections and they have better mentors. And I have only got to where I am today because I had a few mentors who believed in me, pushed me, taught me skills. So my number one advice for you would be, don't get overwhelmed by color or differences. The key thing for you is, as a young person, get a good mentor, build a good relationship with a person that can give you guidance and who's been where you want to be. Look for that person. If any of you want to reach out to me for conversation or something, you're all very welcome. But that's, in my life, has been the number one thing.
I just have to jump in because that set it up for Speak so well. Yes, exactly. That's what we try to do here at Speak. And I noticed, most of my friends are now doctors, and I thought I was going to be one, typical Indian, but I needed to find my path, and it became a little difficult. And I was trying to figure out what was the difference between me and the other people who already got that next step figured out. And it was mentors. And I realized that I didn't have any actual mentors in my network. I had a lot of people who were helpful, but they weren't mentors the willingness to build that close relationship and really find the opportunities for you, really help you find yourself. And mentors are so critical because that's who opens doors. That's who introduces you to a new world. And that's how Speak Mentorship came about. It was a gap that I had, and I noticed that it was a consistent gap I was noticing in communities of color that they didn't have. It's not that one community is smarter than the other. It's not that one community necessarily has more wealth than the other, but one community is definitely more connected than the other here in America. And if you move abroad, I wasn't Chinese. So for me, I didn't have a Chinese network, right? You need Chinese networks in China, and here you need a certain other type of network, whatever that looks like. And so get yourself a mentor. It's what we try to do at Speak Mentorship, to provide you with mentors, but if not through us, then I can't begin to explain how critical that is. Gunjali?
I think you said it. Yeah, right? The mentorship is really important, and when you do get to your jobs, there's a slight difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And sometimes a mentor can't be your sponsor, right? A mentor is the person who's going to open your doors, right? And who's going to kind of say, this is where you need to go, and this is what it looks like. The sponsor is the person who speaks for you when you're not in the room, right? This is the person that says, I think she's right for this project. Here's the new thing we're contemplating, right? This is the person who, as they're moving up ahead in their career trajectory, are kind of are taking you along with them. And it's important to have both.
And so I'm going to ask one final question for the sake of time. We do have a college panel that goes next, but for the last question, to add on to that, given that there are certain communities who don't advocate for themselves, I, for one, it was very hard for me to advocate for myself. And so I still don't have a sponsor necessarily that I have in mind, right? I wouldn't know who my sponsor is. I do believe that there are sponsors in my life, and sometimes people do things behind the scenes that you're unaware of, and that's amazing. But because I don't necessarily promote myself, as you said, 59%, you put things to numbers. And because I didn't do that, people like us or people from certain communities might not have sponsors as easily as certain others who speak up. So answering that, and if you were to speak to your younger self, or any children that you may have on this panel, what would you say?
You want me to start? Okay. So how do you cultivate a sponsor is part one, right? How do you kind of get there? Your performance, right? The last project that you do is critical in the next person understanding your value and your worth to the company, but also having that uncomfortable conversation of this is where I want to get to, right? And making sure the person ahead of you knows that you're ambitious and you have these things and here's where you're trying to get to. So having those conversations, practice them, it's okay, right? I teach an entire sort of women in business leadership class, and we spend 90% of that class doing negotiation. We do salary negotiation because that's another thing women typically don't do. And the second thing we do is how do you congratulate yourself on the project you've just done without doing that, right? How do you let everybody in the room know how successful you are? And it's important to do it. So take those classes, kind of do everything you need to do to get yourself to there. The second part of your question was how do you prepare the world, or
What would you say to
your younger self? So I'm raising a son and a daughter, and I'd like to believe that I would like both of them to be feminists, of course, right? And that it's okay either way, right? Because feminism should be a family thing, not a girl-boy thing at all. But the one thing I'd say to my younger self is find a mentor, right? Find the person that looks like you that you want to be. That would have been very helpful. Yeah.
I agree.
Speak mentorship, again, another plug.
For sponsorship in the legal realm, it's a little different. So it's about being uncomfortable and going to the coffee meeting in the morning time, or going to the after work happy hour. So you're connected and learning different interests in your workplace and sharing what your cultural interests are.
So I think that's how we can find sponsorship for us. Speaking to my younger self, I still think I am my younger self because I'm 30, but I guess speaking to my younger self, I would tell myself, have confidence in your abilities. Trust